Hello, I'm Michael Boyajian, and I want to thank the Franklin D. Roosevelt Library and Museum and the Roosevelt Institute for providing me with this opportunity to speak to members only about my book, B. Artin Haig FDR's Photographer. B. Artin Haig, and I hope other members of the museum take part in this special program as well. Getting back to the book, B. Artin Haig was 3 years old when his family was killed by the in the Armenian genocide. He lost his mother and father, and he survived only by hiding under the skirts of his aunt. Um, he and his sister did survive, and his sister and the aunt moved to France, where they stayed for decades and away from Artin Haig himself. He didn't see his sister for many, many years, let alone his aunt, and until they moved to the United States many years later. And B. Artin Haig himself was carried away from his family home by Kurdish warriors who took him to his family members in Istanbul, the Keshian family, and they ran orphanages there, which saved many, many Armenian lives. Many children survived the genocide by staying in these orphanages. In fact, I have family members that survived as well. My grandfather, Krikor Kalanjian, survived the genocide by being in an orphanage. He left the orphanage when he was 14 and traveled to the United States by himself and got a job washing dishes at the Commodore Hotel. And he worked very hard there until he was able to bring his mother over first, and then all eight of his siblings, and all of whom went on to great expectations in the United States. Um, I did also lose a family member in the genocide, a direct family member, my great great grandfather, Garabad Kalhanjian, who was a teacher. And I have a book. I have a picture of him near my couch, which you could probably see over my shoulder. Taken a few weeks before there was a knock at the door, and he was taken away by the Turks and never seen again. He was a teacher, by the way. In any event, getting back to B. Artin Haig, the family moves to Marseille and then to Argentina and finally to New York and Ellis Island. They're delayed at Ellis Island because of a couple of the children, including B. Artin Haig, had some type of illness, and they weren't allowed into the country until the illness ran its course, which was about a month. There was also a mix-up in the paperwork of B. Artin Haig because he liked to change his name a lot. He changed his Armenian name to several different versions of it, and it ended up that his name became B. Artin Haig, and also Bob Haig, and his children, his great grandchildren, nicknamed him Honey. What happened was his wife kept calling him Honey all the time, and one of the kids said, "That's your name, Honey," and it stuck, and that's what they called him after that, Honey. But anyhow, he eventually gets everything in order, and the family goes through Ellis Island, and they establish themselves. B. Artin Haig eventually becomes a runner on Wall Street, and he likes to talk about how he survived the crash and the Great Depression by saying the only thing that affected him adversely was that the tips were a little lower. He didn't know anyone who jumped off the roof of a building like many did during the start of the Depression. Many people lost their life's wealth and jumped off buildings. But in any case, he gets through the rough times as a runner on Wall Street, and he becomes an avid Yankee fan, avid New York Yankees fan, and he gets to see Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig play, and he says he becomes an astute fan of baseball, and he says that Lou Gehrig, if he had lived longer and survived what they call Lou Gehrig's disease, he would have been a greater player than Babe Ruth. Um, B. Artin Haig, by the way, at Yankee Stadium, he liked to sit by third base. And the reason was that he liked to see the players steal home plate. That was the most exciting thing for him to see. And in any event, there were many ticker tape parades in those days, and B. Artin Haig, being on Wall Street, probably saw them. The Yankees didn't march in a ticker tape parade down Wall Street, the Canyon of Heroes, until well after the time Artin Haig was in New York. Artin Haig probably did see Lindbergh and Amelia Earhart march down the Canyon of Heroes, but not the New York Yankees. But he did see the New York Yankees many world championships, and he did see the greatest Yankee team of all time, the 1927 Yankees, the so-called Murderers Row team. In any event, he wants to move up in the world, and he tells one of his relatives he wants to get into photography because, quote unquote, he wants to take pictures of pretty women. Well, the relative is smart enough to know that that's not a good reason to go into photography, and says, "Look, I will teach you the chemistry of photography." And chemistry was very important in those days because you had to know how to mix the chemicals to produce the photography from the film. And those who knew the secret of good chemistry, chemical mixing, were the great photographers, or at least had a foot up on the other photographers. In any case, he learns the craft and lands a job at the Ziegfeld Follies in New York, which was a big vaudeville act, and he learns the craft there and becomes a great photographer, and then moves down to Washington, D.C. To live with another relative, and gets a job at Underwood and Underwood. Underwood and Underwood is famous for their news coverage. They gained fame during the era of Theodore Roosevelt, and carried the business through to the time of Franklin D. Roosevelt. They started out with photography news and went into also newsreels. But B. Artin Haig takes a job with them as a bridal photographer and works his way up the ladder, and eventually becomes the White House photographer for Underwood and Underwood. And he has a rapport with the president. He helps him put his cufflinks on all the time, and they have a nice rapport going on. And but at a certain point, and this goes on throughout his career, B. Artin Haig has disagreements with his supervisor. He thinks he's a better photographer than any of his supervisors, and he ends up leaving the company to prove himself elsewhere. So he's leaving his job at Underwood and Underwood, and one of his relatives has lunch with him and says, "You got to come back." And Haig says, "No way, I'm leaving. That's it. I'm fed up." And he goes, "No, the president is asking for you. He's asking what happened to that nice young man that used to come here." And so Haig had no choice but to return and work for, to continue taking pictures of FDR. Their rapport was so good that at one point, Haig commanded to FDR that when it came to the photography sessions, he was the boss, not the president. And the president agreed to that. Imagine that, one of the greatest presidents in the history of the United States agreeing to the demands of a photographer. And the amazing thing is, there's a lot of similarities between the two men. They both overcame great difficulties. The president, as you know, at the peak of his political career, came down with polio, and which was a very rare thing for an adult, and he managed to overcome it. He used to try and walk with braces up and down the driveway at the family home in Hyde Park. I myself used to go to the same spot to exercise my legs when they became injured, and I didn't know it at the time until I started this research, that we had both had the same idea in mind of trying to get our legs to work. In any case, Artin Haig also overcame great difficulties in surviving the genocide and coming to a strange country and learning a new language and rising to the height of photography, becoming a presidential photographer, and for none less than FDR. In any case, He takes FDR's for. He works for Underwood and Underwood, taking presidential photographs for many years, and finally moves off to Dallas to another studio there, which is famous for its chemical work, and he probably learned a thing or two there before he strikes out for the Midway to Milwaukee. And he has great success here on two fronts. The first front is his craft, his photography. He opens 4 or 5 studios and starts out with bridal photography and continues with that throughout his career, being a bridal photographer. And he also tells people when he's taking their picture that he's going to make their picture as if he was an artist painting a picture. That's how much of a technique he had. And that's what's great about, by the way, his FDR photographs that you can see at the research library at the museum. By the way, none of the photographers at the White House at that time signed their names in the entry books. They were just listed as press. In fact, on many of the pictures, none of the photographers' names are on any of the pictures, other than the name of the company they took pictures for, like Acme, UPI, etc. Life magazine may have been an exception to that, but you can take all the Underwood and Underwood pictures and surmise which are B. Artin Haig's by going by the years that he was the White House photographer. The chances are 99% certain that they're his photographs, and the style is unmistakable. His style is that he gets a twinkle in the eye of everyone he's taking a picture of, including President Roosevelt. And it makes President Roosevelt human. He's not this iconic stone figure like George Washington or something. He has emotion. He has a twinkle in his eye, a smile. And that's what B. Artin Haig captures, and that's what makes him a great photographer. So great that he becomes a master photographer. In any case, in Milwaukee, he ends up going beyond bridal photography, taking pictures of captains of industry like the Rockefellers and the owners of the Schlitz Brewing Company and many others. He also takes Hollywood celebrity pictures like Spencer Tracy, Elizabeth Taylor, and he also takes photographs of the great religious leaders of Milwaukee, including Cardinal O'Connor, who got his religious career started in Milwaukee before coming to New York. Excuse me, not Cardinal O'Connor, Cardinal Dolan. In any event, the other thing that happens to him in Milwaukee is that he has a very large family. He has 18 family members that he has, 4 daughters, one of which I should mention, Artin Gardner, who was a great help in making this book. She was the gatekeeper for the family. She provided most of the direction and information on the family and B. Artin Haig, and I'd like to thank her for that. And he has 4 daughters, and altogether 18 family members, which included grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and 1 great-great-grandchild. And that's the really important thing about him in Milwaukee, is not so much becoming a master photographer and becoming a great businessman, but also having family, something he had lost in the Armenian genocide when his family was taken away from him. And he was separated from his sister and his aunt for many years. Now he's surrounded by family. He likes to play backgammon with the family. That's his favorite game. And he plays tough. He doesn't let them win, even if they're kids. He wants to teach them a lesson of, how you have to be very competitive. He hangs out with a lot of academics. The president of one university said he was an avid martini drinker. He used to drink with Karsh, another great photographer who was Armenian, and he's compared to Karsh. Yet, unlike Karsh, he never sought the limelight. Karsh was famous. He's in all the books. He's in many museums. But B. Artin Haig liked to fly under the radar and just hang out with his family and carry out the art of photography. He lived to 104. On his 100th birthday, they had a great celebration that lasted 3 days. The first day was family only, and family members from all over came, and including members of the Kashishian family. One in particular, Mark Kashishian, who was like the representative of the Kashishians at the party, came, and it was a great party. And after the first day, the next 2 days were dedicated to family and friends. In any event, he lived to 104 and died surrounded by family. He was a great photographer, but more importantly, he was a great family member. And that's the summary of the book. There's a lot more details and photography in the book, including his own photography, as well as family photography and pictures of FDR-oriented things in the local area around the FDR family home. Again, I'd like to thank the Franklin D. Roosevelt Library and Museum and the Roosevelt Institute for allowing me to participate in this program, and I urge other members to join in this special program for members only. Thank you. Bye-bye.